One of the most influential behind-the-scene players in the Israeli-Palestinian peace initiative, Mark Brzezinski, is joining me this week on The Autograph to talk about the challenges and missed opportunities he witnessed firsthand in the Middle East conflict, from his personal meeting with Anwar Sadat to his talks with Palestinian officials. I'm Susan Modaris. Welcome to The Autograph. Mark Brzezinski is a Jewish-American scholar and author who holds dual advanced degrees in international affairs and law from Princeton University and New York University. He's a journalist and international affairs consultant and the publisher of MiddleEast.org. Brzezinski has made more than 200 international trips to over 45 countries. From 1994 to 2003, his show Mid-East Realities ran on primetime cable in the D.C. area and was considered one of the first shows presenting an alternative outlook to what the mainstream media was covering. I sat down with him in Washington, D.C. to talk about the prospects of peace in the Middle East and the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
It was pre-YouTube, pre-internet video. Cable access was available. I didn't even know about it, but I was invited in '94 to cable access in Chicago, and then I found out about it, and then I said, my God, I'm in Washington. Can we get on all the cable channels and we don't have to pay because we don't have the funds? And the answer was yes, and we started producing the show. And we got primetime evening slots in Virginia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., but we never had a budget to promote and to advertise. And in 2003, I just said, we're not really having enough impact, and we're just not going to do it anymore. And so we stopped it.
In 1982, Brzezinski once again made international headlines when he authored the Paris Declaration, published on the front page of Le Monde. This was a breakthrough event that greatly contributed to major political developments soon to take place.
In the 80s, in a sense, a lot of us knew there was this political cancer. It was very bad. It was eating up the patient. It needed to be dealt with and cured. A month before the Donahue show, I was in Paris, and I was sitting in a hotel room. This was one of the big events in my life with four other people. They were the important people. I was the person who did the work, who wrote the document. But who were these people? The former president of France, Pierre Mendès France, the founder of the World Zionist Organization and the World Jewish Congress, Nachum Goldman. His successor, who was the only Jewish leader in America who'd ever been president of B'nai B'rith and World Jewish Congress and Secretary of Commerce, and was my close friend, and I worked for him for 10 years. The man who inspired it was the PLO man, Issam Sertawi, the head of the PLO in Europe. And they signed this document called the Paris Declaration. I wrote it. It was the entire front page of Le Monde 2 days later. Arafat responded. That was on the front page of Le Monde. But then also we ran out of steam. We didn't, the organizations that these men had founded were not willing to even entertain a discussion of what they'd signed. They disassociated themselves from the people who had founded their own organizations. So then the Donahue show came. And one day, in fact, I had an office at DuPont Circle then, I get this call, Donahue show. Of course, everybody knew what the Donahue show was. There was no competition. That was the talk show. And they said, we need you to be in Chicago tomorrow. You've got to come on our program. And I said, give me a few minutes. I'll call you back. I'll give you a list of Jewish leaders that are much better known than I am. And I called them back, and they said, thank you. You're right. We've called them all. None of them will come on our program. Okay, so I went on. It was a discussion about, this is pre-Intifada. This is pre-apartheid. This is pre-settlements. There were some, but not many. It was all about how to bring peace to the region. The two-state solution emphasized was, in fact, a possible solution. It wasn't going to be totally fair. Palestinians were going to get a small amount of territory compared to their homeland. But at least there was a lot of support from political people to make it happen. That world is gone. So the two-state solution is now dead, with the possible exception that you'd have to roll back a tremendous number of things that happened. That's not going to happen. The reason it's not going to happen is not because President Obama's not a smart man, not because he doesn't know that the cancer's gotten a lot worse. He knows all that. He also knows that politically he's totally blocked. There's no way in the world he can come up against the Israeli Jewish lobby and their great group of institutions and personalities and foundations, and no way. He knows it. So he continues to talk the language of two-state solution, but that's largely to keep Abbas and the PA from being totally discredited.
During his inaugural as U.S. president, reports were circulating that he is going to move away, his administration is going to move away from the Bush doctrine of rejecting Hamas into talks. Where does Hamas stand into the equation? Can there even be talks with the Palestinians when Hamas is sidelined?
You know, you mentioned my program that ended in 2003. I interviewed Musa Abu Marzouk for the program, the number 2 leader in Hamas. He wasn't a free man at the time. He was arrested. He was in New York City in the penitentiary. He had been a businessman in Arlington, not far from here. Successful businessman, respected community leader. Then I think it was 96, and those forces I just mentioned, I call them the Israeli Jewish Lobby, got the Congress to pass a law outlawing Hamas. Abu Marzouk was imprisoned. He was in New York. I got permission to go see him. His people helped facilitate. So I did 3 programs, 3 Mideast Realities TV programs, and they are available through links at middleeast.org. I don't think the Obama people ever said anything positive about Hamas. I think they did say they were going to reinvigorate the peace process. But those are words, those are slogans. The devil's in the details. What did that mean? And all it meant was, oh, we're going to say they have to stop settlements. Well, Obama made a joke out of himself. He made a fool out of himself. Didn't anybody tell him what was going to happen the moment he tried to get the Israelis to actually stop building settlements? There's a whole history here. It goes back to Camp David, goes back to President Carter, who also told the world that he had got the Israelis to agree to stop settlements. And then the Israelis at that time made a fool out of that president by saying, the president got it a little wrong. We did discuss at Camp David that we were going to freeze settlements, but for 90 days. And then after 90 days, they escalated, and we now live in the world we now live in. So the story of how Obama became president, how he got support from groups in the Democratic Party. Obama's a very different kind of president. We were all relieved. It was very embarrassing for 8 years. Much more than embarrassing for people in the world who were suffering and being killed by a president. Frankly, it's not said in Washington. It's not the kind of thing you say at public meetings. But many of us consider those leaders war criminals. And we consider Cheney and Bush. They fit the definition of war criminals. When Obama ran, we all kind of wondered. Rashid Holiday is his friend. He's a bright guy. He stands for human rights and principles. But then during the campaign, certain things happened. First of all, the top financiers of the Democratic Party are well known to be, half of them are Jewish, and almost all of them are quite Zionist and quite involved with the Israelis. At the time that Hillary and Obama were competing for support, AIPAC had its annual convention. On that day, I remember what happened. Obama was brought privately. First, he gave a speech, and his speech was more than was expected. I remember seeing Lee Hamilton, who's someone I know, a few days later, and Lee was on his advisory board. And Lee said to me, he said, he went too far. He shouldn't have said what he said about Jerusalem. We're going to be correcting it. So that's the kind of speech he gave. Then what happened? Behind the scenes, he was taken to meet the board of directors. The AIPAC board of directors was sitting upstairs in the hotel room waiting to have their chance at Obama. Who took him to see? A man by the name of Rahm Emanuel escorted Obama upstairs. Now, this is very unusual. Presidential candidates don't usually get interviewed by boards of directors like this. But AIPAC is different. The Israeli lobby is different. What happened that day is the way the Israeli community signaled that they were going to support Obama was they didn't make any announcement. They didn't even say they'd met with him. But that afternoon, Raham endorsed Obama. So a few hours later, Raham came out in public, endorsed Obama, and that was the signal to the rest of us that Obama has made his peace with this lobby and that he wasn't going to be able to do anything they weren't going to approve of.
You know, you mentioned that it was well known to you that the Arab-Israeli conflict will be political cancer if it's not resolved, if it wasn't resolved. And at this point, it has become the cancer that you mentioned. What has been the main obstacle of not reaching a solution? It's a very cliched question, but there has to be an obstacle.
The main obstacle is right here, within half a mile of this location. America's the superpower. America money, American arms, American UN vetoes, American military support at critical times. The Israelis took a decision way back in the 40s. And it goes back to the Holocaust, and it goes back to Jewish impotence, and there's lots of factors that go into this. It's not a black and white situation. It was a powerless community. I was part of it. I was born into a family that had, my mother and father would tell me, we lost all of our relatives. Nobody knows where they are. They've all been killed. Maybe some escaped to what had become Israel. The United States has prevented a settlement of the Arab-Israeli conflict because the Israelis set up such powerful institutions, lobbies, publications, personalities, control in various ways of the political parties and of the media, making it impossible for American leaders to do what they knew they should do to solve this cancer. And it goes way back. It goes back to General Marshall, the Secretary of State, when Truman told Marshall that he was going to accept a Jewish state. Marshall was going to resign. He said, this is not in the interests of the United States. This is going to bring war, which we won't be able to end. It's just going to get worse. It's going to unleash forces we won't be able to control. He was exactly right. But he was Secretary of State and Truman was president. At every critical moment since, Eisenhower tried to do things in the 50s. Carter tried to do things in the 70s. They were blocked. And we could, go in and discuss each one. There's plenty of books and academic information about this. The Israelis then realized, since they had control of the states, and Sharon said it bluntly back, I think, in 2001, he and Peres had a little debate in a cabinet meeting. And the word that leaked out was, Peres said, we got to be careful. The Americans aren't happy with what we're doing. And Sharon just sort of yelled at him, stop worrying about the Americans. We control things in America. I'll take care of things there. Don't worry about it. And he was right. And I've been here watching this. I did a lot of traveling for a lot of years and went to the Middle East a great deal. But this has been my home base. And it's been outrageous.
Very early in his career, Brzezinski made world headlines when he personally met alone with former Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and encouraged him to visit Israel. A short time thereafter, Sadat took this step. A picture of Brzezinski meeting with Sadat appeared on the front page of Egyptian newspapers just days before Sadat's announcement.
I was a kid journalist just out of school. The Egyptian embassy in Washington read something I had written, a movie review about a movie called Children of Rage. And they called me and they said, oh, very interesting. And by the way, Ashraf Gorbals knows, he was the ambassador, he knows Kletznik. Would you like to be our guest? You'll be the first young Jewish journalist that's ever been invited by our government. Of course, I said yes. So I go for 3 weeks as their guest and I meet everybody, the foreign minister, the minister of state. And then they say to me, we know that the 3 weeks are up, but we want you to stay longer because the president would like to meet with you. And they were so surprised when I said, well, I could stay one more day, but I've really got other places that I have to go. So thank him so much. It's a great honor, but it's been so nice to meet all of you. And I took off. And I went to Amman, and then I went to Israel. There was going to be a big peace conference. And you'll see the connections in just a minute. There's going to be this big peace conference. And I get to Israel, and I go to the New Outlook magazine, which is sponsoring the conference. And George Ball, the most important Undersecretary of State, the man who helped resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis, was going to be the keynote speaker. And they said to me, Mark, where have you been? And I said, I've just been to Egypt. And, I'm here because they wanted me to stay and meet the president, but I had to come to your peace conference. And they say, oh, my God, don't you know what's happened? And I didn't, because I'd been traveling. And it wasn't like you could turn into Al Jazeera in those days. They said, the president gave a speech, and he said he's willing to go anywhere and do anything to bring peace. And they said, you were supposed to have a meeting with him? And I said, yes. I was in Israel for about 6 hours. They gave me a whole bunch of cash. They wrote a letter. They said, Mark, go back to Cairo and meet the president and invite him to come to our peace conference. So a day later, I'm sitting with the president of Egypt. I'm giving him this invitation. He's asking me about my trip, my 3 weeks in his country. So there I am, and I'm and it's a little hard for me to believe. I'm sitting with the president of Egypt all alone. Maybe 40, 50 feet away, there's somebody from the Ministry of the Interior or somebody to protect him, but he can't even hear. He's so far away. And I was so disappointed because at the end of the meeting, which was very nice, he said, I'm very sorry, I will not be able to come to your peace conference. And then I was just looking, I guess, sad. I don't remember saying anything. And he said, but I have decided I will send a telegram to this conference. And I already knew leaders in the Arab world don't send telegrams to Israel. I'd never heard of such a thing. There was no procedure. And I figured it was his way of just being polite to me. I literally had to leave on the first flight in the morning. And I went to a travel agent that was recommended to me. But the moment I whispered Israel, don't say another word about Israel. We can't talk about Israel. No way we can get you to Israel. He said, first flight in the morning goes to Athens. That's all I can do. Okay, so I'm on my flight to Athens. And I'm dog tired and I'm half asleep. And I traveled so much in those days. The moment anybody would ask me anything, I'd say orange juice and English. And when I woke up on the plane, there was this newspaper in front of me, the Egyptian Gazette. And I wasn't sure if I was hallucinating or dreaming, because as my eyes cleared, good God, that's me. There's this big picture of me and Sadat on the front page at the top of the paper. But no story. Just journalist Mark Brzezinski meets President Anwar Sadat. No story, no nothing. A day later, I'm called aside by the chairman of the conference. And they say, Mark, in 1 hour there's a press conference. All the media will be here. And you have to come sit up front and you have to tell everybody about your meeting with the president. And I said, what's going on? What's going on? I said, the office is closed. We're all at the hotel, but we sent somebody back to get some papers. And under the door is this telegram. And it wasn't just, hope you have a nice conference. It was a whole page of the importance of peace to the region, what this conflict has done, the importance of us reaching an accommodation. I mean, a very long statement, which I later learned Boutros Ghali and others had written for him, and I had met Boutros.
Right.
And for 24 hours, I was the hit. You're the guy who met the president. You've arranged this telegram. And then on Thursday morning came the unbelievable announcement. The president of Egypt arrives in Israel on Shabbat, on Saturday, as soon as the sun goes down. And it's like something out of some dream. People started arriving within hours. Everybody's arriving. A press center was set up in almost minutes. There were free phones. Anybody could pick up a phone, could call anyone, anywhere. And on Saturday night he arrived, and I went to the airport with the Egyptian press delegation, and we all thought the world was going to change now. The Israelis would feel accepted. the Palestinians would have their homeland. At the time, it was called a homeland. We weren't even talking about a state.
Yeah.
And then everything started to deteriorate. And 3 years later, Sadat was assassinated, and it's been downhill ever since.
So the postponement of decisions on settlement led to the fact that it turned from an occupation issue in the eyes of the international community and everyone who was observing the settlement issues to a contested issue. At that point, the issue of settlement could be contested after Oslo. Before that, it was an occupation issue. It wasn't even discussed.
Once the Israelis got the PA, Abbas was the man who actually signed the document at the White House. Once they got them to sign this agreement and become their collaborating regime without having agreed to stop the settlements, that's symbolic. If the Israelis weren't going to stop enlarging the occupation, how could we possibly consider this to be a major step on the way to a peace settlement? So it was the symbolism of it, not the actual settlement here or there. The Israelis never intended to stop the settlements. Rabin, in my judgment, never intended for what he was signing to end up being a Palestinian state. For them, it was autonomy repackaged under different names, and they were hiring Arafat and his people to control the Palestinian people. And that, of course, is the origin of the growth of Hamas, because many non-religious people, many people who had been supporters of Fatah and supporters of more secular things, they decided we're going to support Hamas because at least they're honest, at least they're dignified, at least they have principles, at least they're not corrupt, and Fatah has sold us out. And that's the origins of how, in 2006, Hamas was elected.
I'm going to dare ask this question to wrap up. Is there light at the end of the tunnel?
It's a very long, dark tunnel now, but hopefully saner, wiser policies will prevail, and down the road. And we can't afford this anymore. Our own empire is collapsing financially, morally, spiritually, in terms of the credibility of American institutions. We don't feel it so much in Washington, but around the country, the Tea Party and the other movements are representative of a feeling that our future is dissolving, and our place in the world and our standard of living and what we're providing for our children. There's big conflict here, and we don't have the resources to continue these policies, even if you want to argue the policies are right.
Mark Brzezinski, thank you very much for joining us on The Autograph.
Thank you, Susan.
That's all the time we have for this edition of The Autograph here on Press TV. Thank you for staying with us and watching. Remember, you can always send us your emails to The Autograph at SusanMadaris.com. We're always looking forward to them. Email us and join our discussion. Until next week in another show, goodbye.